NASA says we're going back to the moon. Elon Musk says humans will live on Mars. And the public is told it's not a question of if, but when. But here's the part that almost never makes the headlines. Mars isn't just difficult to survive on. It's actively hostile to the human body. No breathable air. No protective magnetic field. No real gravity. And no rescue mission if something goes wrong. Yet we keep hearing the same promise. A future where humans colonize Mars. So here's the question no one seems to want to answer. What if sending humans to Mars isn't the next great step for humanity, but the most expensive way we've ever invented to slowly die? Before you accept the dream, let's look at the data. Before we go any further, it's important to clarify what this video isn't. This is not science denial, and it's not anti-space exploration. Skepticism is not the rejection of science. It's how science works. Every major scientific breakthrough began with someone questioning an assumption everyone else accepted. And when it comes to Mars colonization, the assumption is simple, that humans can eventually live there safely. But assumptions don't keep people alive. Data does. Everything you're about to hear comes from mainstream, institutional sources, not fringe speculation. NASA's own biomedical research, European Space Agency studies, Roscosmos long-duration mission data, and decades of astronaut health reports from the International Space Station. In fact, much of the strongest evidence against long-term human survival on Mars comes directly from space agencies that publicly support Mars missions. That contradiction matters. Because if colonizing Mars were truly viable, not inspirational, not symbolic, but biologically sustainable, we would already see clear, measurable progress in the data. We don't. What we see instead are consistent warning signs. Accelerating bone loss, irreversible muscle degradation, DNA damage from radiation, immune system suppression, neurological and psychological strain. These aren't hypothetical risks. They're documented outcomes, observed in astronauts who are still protected by Earth's magnetic field and can return home within hours if something goes wrong. So this investigation isn't asking the popular question, can we reach Mars? We already know the answer to that. The real question is far more uncomfortable. Can the human body survive there long term, without permanent damage, without collapse, and without relying on technologies that don't yet exist? Because reaching a planet is an engineering challenge. Living there is a biological one. And biology doesn't negotiate with ambition. When people imagine the dangers of Mars, they usually think of dramatic things, explosions, equipment failures, maybe run out of oxygen. But the most serious threat on Mars isn't loud, sudden, or cinematic. It's invisible. And once it starts damaging the human body, there's no way to stop it. On Earth, life survives because we are protected by two critical shields. The first is our thick atmosphere, which absorbs and scatters incoming radiation. The second is our global magnetic field, which deflects charged particles away from the planet entirely. Mars has neither. Its atmosphere is more than 100 times thinner than Earth's, and its magnetic field, if it can even be called that, is weak, fragmented, and essentially useless for planetary protection. This means that on Mars, radiation doesn't get deflected, it hits you directly. There are two main types of radiation humans will be exposed on Mars. The first is solar radiation, high-energy particles constantly ejected by the sun, especially during solar flares. On Earth, most of this never reaches the surface. On Mars, there's almost nothing stopping it. The second, and far more dangerous, is galactic cosmic radiation. These are particles accelerated to near-light speed by distant supernovae. They are so energetic that even thick metal shielding struggles to stop them. When they pass through the human body, they don't just damage cells. They tear through DNA itself. And this is not speculation. NASA has already measured this. In 2012, the Curiosity rover carried an instrument specifically designed to measure radiation on the Martian surface. The results were alarming. Radiation levels on Mars were found to be several times higher than what astronauts experience aboard the International Space Station. And here's the critical part. Astronauts on the ISS are still protected by Earth's magnetic field. They are also limited by strict lifetime radiation exposure caps set by NASA itself. A round-trip mission to Mars, just a journey there and back, not living on the surface, would already push many astronauts to or beyond those lifetime limits. Living on Mars would exceed them entirely, which raises a question that almost never gets asked publicly. If astronauts are not allowed to exceed these radiation limits in low Earth orbit, why would those limits suddenly stop matching on Mars? They wouldn't. Radiation damage is cumulative. It doesn't reset, and it doesn't care how inspiring the mission is. Over time, high radiation exposure dramatically increases the risk of multiple forms of cancer, cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disorders, immune system collapse, and perhaps most critically for any idea of colonization, infertility and genetic damage. Radiation doesn't just affect the person exposed. It alters reproductive cells, increasing the likelihood of mutations being passed on to future generations, which leads to an uncomfortable implication. Even if adults somehow accepted the risk, what happens to children born on Mars? Now, supporters of Mars colonization often respond with a simple solution: we'll live underground. But this idea sounds far more effective than it actually is. Yes, burying habitats under Martian soil or regolith can reduce radiation exposure, but it does not eliminate it. Galactic cosmic rays are so energetic that they can penetrate meters of solid material. In some cases, shielding can actually make the problem worse. When high-energy particles strike dense materials, they can produce secondary radiation, a cascade of new particles that increase biological damage rather than reduce it. And even if underground habitats significantly lowered radiation levels, astronauts would still need to maintain surface equipment, travel outside habitats, repair systems during emergencies. Every excursion adds exposure. Every year adds risk. Radiation is not something you solve once. It's something that keeps accumulating. Silently, NASA itself acknowledges this problem. In internal reports, radiation is consistently listed as one of the top unsolved barriers to human Mars missions. Not engineering, not fuel, not propulsion, biology. And this brings us back to a critical contradiction. Public-facing narratives talk about Mars as a future home, a second Earth. But the data describes something very different. A place where the human body is constantly bombarded at the molecular level, where DNA repair mechanisms are overwhelmed, where long-term survival means accepting damage that cannot be undone. So when you hear confident claims about permanent settlements on Mars, ask yourself this: if radiation exposure limits are treated as non-negotiable safety rules in Earth orbit, why are they suddenly treated as optional when the destination is Mars? Because the truth is harder to sell. Mars isn't just dangerous because of what you can see. It's dangerous because of what you can't. And radiation doesn't wait for technology to catch up. Radiation isn't the only invisible force working against human survival on Mars. Gravity is, or more accurately, the lack of it. On Earth, every system in your body has evolved under one constant condition, one full gravity. Your bones, muscles, heart, eyes, and even your sense of balance all depend on that constant downward force to function properly. Mars provides only 38% of Earth's gravity. And while that might sound like a manageable adjustment, decades of spaceflight data suggest otherwise. We already have a long-term laboratory for studying what reduced gravity does to the human body. It's called the International Space Station. Astronauts aboard the ISS experience microgravity, not Mars gravity. But a biological trend is clear and consistent. The human body begins to break down almost immediately. Within weeks, astronauts lose measurable bone density. Within months, muscles begin to atrophy despite daily exercise. Over longer missions, astronauts experience changes to their vision, including permanent flattening of the eyeball and damage to the optic nerve. This condition even has a name now: spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. And then there's the heart. In microgravity, the heart no longer has to work against gravity to pump blood upward. Over time, it weakens, blood volume decreases. When astronauts return to Earth, many experience dizziness, fainting, and difficulty standing, even after missions lasting less than a year. Now here's the crucial part. Mars gravity is not zero. But it's also not enough. There is no evidence that 38% gravity is sufficient to prevent these biological failures. None. No human has ever lived in partial gravity for years. We have no long-term data showing that bones stop thinning, that muscles stabilize, or that the cardiovascular system adapts permanently. In fact, what limited research we do have suggests the opposite. That damage continues, just more slowly. Supporters of Mars colonization often point to exercise as a solution. Astronauts on the ISS already exercise for 2 to 3 hours every single day. They use resistance machines designed specifically to simulate weight-bearing loads. And still, bone loss continues. Still, muscles shrink. Still, recovery on Earth can take months or never fully occur. Exercise slows the damage. It does not stop it. And slowing damage is not the same as surviving long-term. This raises a critical distinction that rarely gets discussed. Temporary adaptation is not permanent viability. Astronauts can tolerate reduced gravity for limited periods because they know they're coming home. Their bodies can partially recover, at least for now. Mars colonization assumes something very different. It assumes people will live their entire lives there. And that's where the biology collapses. If adults already experience degradation after months or years in space, what happens over decades? More importantly, what happens to the next generation? What happens to children born in Mars gravity? Their bones would develop under reduced load. Their muscles would never experience full resistance. Their cardiovascular systems would form in an environment where the heart doesn't need to work as hard. Would they even be able to survive Earth gravity if they returned? We don't know. And that's the problem. There is no evidence that human development can occur normally in partial gravity. There is no data showing that pregnancy, fetal development, and childhood growth are safe under these conditions. This isn't a small unknown. It's a foundational one. Mars colonization isn't just about keeping adults alive. It's about sustaining a population across generations. And right now, everything we know suggests that human biology is not designed for that environment. You can't engineer your way around gravity. You can't shield yourself from it. You can't replace it with technology. And you can't negotiate with millions of years of evolution. Mars gravity isn't slightly inconvenient. It's fundamentally incompatible with the way the human body maintains itself. So when you hear claims that humans will simply adapt to Mars, remember this. Adaptation isn't guaranteed, and survival isn't the same as functioning, because a body that slowly breaks down over time is not a body that can build a civilization. And the most unsettling question remains unanswered. If humans grow up on Mars, will they still be human in the ways that matter? Even if radiation didn't exist, even if gravity weren't slowly damaging the body, there's another barrier to living on Mars that no amount of engineering can fully solve. The human mind. Mars is not just physically distant from Earth. It is psychologically unreachable. At its closest, Mars is about 56 million kilometers away. At its farthest, more than 400 million. That distance creates a delay that changes everything. A message sent from Mars can take up to 22 minutes to reach Earth. A reply takes another 22 minutes to come back. That's nearly 3/4 of an hour for a single exchange. No real-time conversations. No live guidance during emergencies. No immediate reassurance when something goes wrong. For the first time in human history, people would live completely beyond the reach of instant human contact. And that matters more than we like to admit. Human psychology evolved in social environments where help was always nearby, where voices could answer back, where isolation was temporary, and where danger and escape was possible. Mars removes all of that. Supporters of Mars missions often point to analog environments on Earth, Antarctica, submarines, remote research stations. But these comparisons miss a critical difference. Every one of those environments has an exit. In Antarctica, evacuation is difficult, but not impossible. In submarines, communication is limited, but not delayed by tens of minutes. On Earth, no matter how remote you are still on Earth. Mars offers none of that. There is no evacuation. There is no rescue mission. There is no possibility of coming home early. Once you're there, you're there. and the brain knows it. Studies from isolation experiments and long-duration missions consistently show the same psychological trends: depression, sleep disruption, anxiety, paranoia, emotional flattening. Over time, minor disagreements escalate, social bonds strain, trust erodes. Even highly trained professionals, astronauts, military personnel, scientists, are not immune. In fact, they may be more vulnerable because the pressure to perform, to remain composed, to not become the weak link, often suppresses early warning signs until they become crises. Now add something Mars uniquely introduces: delayed consequences. Imagine a medical emergency, a system's malfunction, a sudden psychological breakdown. On Earth, help arrives. On the ISS, guidance is immediate. On Mars, you send a message and wait, and wait, and wait. By the time Earth responds, the situation may already be irreversible. That delay doesn't just affect logistics. It affects decision-making. People under stress make worse choices. People who feel unheard, unseen, and unsupported take greater risks or shut down entirely. And over years of isolation, that psychological load compounds. There's also the weight of permanence. Mars colonization is often framed as heroic, but heroism fades. What remains is routine, repetition, confinement, the same limited spaces, the same faces, the same red landscape, endlessly barren, endlessly hostile. No forests, no oceans, no weather that feels alive, just dust and silence. Psychologists call this sensory deprivation, and it has profound effects on mental health, hallucinations, distorted time perception, loss of motivation, emotional detachment. And unlike missions on Earth, there is no natural reset, no seasons, no society, no return, which leads to the most unsettling question of all. What happens when something goes wrong? And Earth can't answer back. Not in theory, not in simulations, but in real time, with real lives, millions of kilometers away. Mars isn't just far. It's psychologically unforgiving, and no amount of optimism can shorten the distance between a human mind and the planet that made it. When people imagine living on Mars, they often picture advanced habitats, sealed domes, glowing lights, plants growing in neat rows. It looks stable, controlled, almost comfortable. But every one of those systems exists for a single reason. Without them, humans die. On Earth, life support is invisible. Oxygen is everywhere. Water falls from the sky. Food grows in open soil. If one system fails, others compensate. Mars offers no such forgiveness. Every breath, every sip of water, every calorie depends on machinery that cannot fail. Let's start with the most basic requirement: oxygen. On Mars, oxygen must be generated artificially, either by splitting carbon dioxide or electrolyzing water. These systems are complex, energy-intensive, and sensitive to contamination and wear. A single malfunction doesn't mean inconvenience. It means suffocation. Next is water. Water on Mars is not freely available. Any colony would rely almost entirely on closed-loop recycling systems, the same concept used on the ISS, but pushed far beyond what they were designed to do. On the ISS, these systems still fail. Filters clog, pumps break, parts wear out. The difference is that on the ISS, resupply missions can arrive. On Mars, there is no resupply. Every failure must be fixed with whatever parts are already there, or not fixed at all. Then there's food. Mars colonization is often sold with images of greenhouses and self-sustaining farms. But growing food on Mars is not the same as growing food on Earth. No natural soil, no stable sunlight, high radiation damaging plant DNA, extreme temperature swings. Even small crop failures would be catastrophic. On Earth, a bad harvest is an economic problem. On Mars, it's a death sentence. Now add the single most underestimated threat to all of this technology: Martian dust. Mars is famous for its dust storms, some of them large enough to cover the entire planet. That dust is fine, electrostatically charged, and abrasive. It coats solar panels. It infiltrates seals. It wears down moving parts. During a global dust storm, solar power output can drop to near zero for weeks, which forces a question rarely answered honestly. What happens when the power goes out? Life support doesn't pause. Oxygen systems don't wait. Water recycling doesn't stop consuming energy just because the environment is hostile. Backup systems are often cited as a solution. Redundancy. But redundancy is not invincibility. Every additional system increases complexity. Every layer adds more points of failure. Every repair consumes limited tools, materials, and human energy. On Earth, redundancy works because help is external. On Mars, redundancy is finite. Once you exhaust spare parts, you are done. This is where comparisons to early Earth colonies completely fall apart. Early settlers on Earth faced hardship, but they had air, water, gravity, and ecosystems that wanted them to live. Mars has none of that. There is no environment to fall back on, no outside to escape to, no margin for error. A life support system on Mars isn't like plumbing in a house. It's more like a heart-lung machine keeping a patient alive indefinitely, with no hospital, no replacements, and no backup care. Which brings us to the central question. How many things can fail before a colony collapses completely? One oxygen generator, one power system, one water recycler, one food crop. On Earth, failure is survivable. On Mars, failure is final. And the uncomfortable truth is this. The longer a colony exists, the closer it gets to inevitable breakdown. Not because people are careless, but because machines fail. And on Mars, failure is not an option. It's an ending. Even if humans could survive radiation, low gravity, and isolation, there remains a final, unforgiving obstacle: medical care. On Earth, hospitals are everywhere. Surgeons, specialists, emergency teams, ambulances, all available within hours. Even in remote regions, help is reachable. On Mars, none of that exists. Every medical emergency would occur in a vacuum of care. There would be no hospitals, no specialists, no immediate surgery, no evacuation, no backup. Consider surgery. Even on the ISS, performing a procedure is incredibly difficult. Microgravity complicates everything. Fluids float unpredictably, instruments drift, and the simplest incision requires extraordinary preparation. Mars gravity, though higher than microgravity, is still insufficient to fully stabilize a human body for complex procedures. Performing any operation would be a logistical nightmare, with high risk of complications. Now consider infection. The Martian environment is harsh, but sterile. That may sound good, until you realize that the human immune system is weakened by long-term space exposure. Minor infections that are trivial on Earth could escalate rapidly. Antibiotics can't replace sterile surgical environments. And if a complication arises, there is no advanced care to fall back on. Cancer treatment is another critical problem. Radiation exposure on Mars would increase cancer risk. Chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and surgery, essential treatments, are impossible to provide in a Martian colony. A cancer diagnosis could mean certain death. Pregnancy and childbirth are equally dangerous. Reduced gravity, radiation, and unknown developmental effects on fetuses create enormous risks. Mars colonization advocates rarely address the reality that every pregnancy could be high risk, potentially lethal for both mother and child. Then there are the long-term consequences of radiation-induced mutations. Even if adults survive, the DNA damage incurred could affect reproductive cells, creating genetic problems for future generations. Unlike on Earth, there is no medical infrastructure to monitor, prevent, or treat these issues. This leads to a deeply uncomfortable ethical question. How many people are we willing to lose in pursuit of this dream? Would we approve a Mars mission if the projected death rate were disclosed honestly? On Earth, the idea is unthinkable. On Mars, it is often glossed over as an acceptable risk. But survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about being able to live with dignity and health. Standards Mars cannot guarantee. Every medical emergency becomes a gamble. Every illness carries higher stakes. Every accident could be fatal. Mars is not a planet that waits for human ingenuity. It is a place where one mistake or one unlucky turn of biology ends a life And unlike any frontier on Earth, there is no hospital, no rescue, no second chance. In short, Mars is not only biologically hostile, it is medically uncompromising. And that makes human colonization not just difficult, but ethically, biologically, and practically impossible without risking catastrophic loss. After examining radiation, gravity, isolation, life support, and medical realities, a troubling question emerges. Why do space agencies and private companies keep insisting that Mars colonization is just around the corner, 20 to 30 years away? Part of the answer lies in funding incentives. Bold promises capture public imagination, attract investors, and secure budgets. Ambition sells rockets and grants. Feasibility does not. The more inspiring the vision, the more resources flow, regardless of whether long-term survival is actually possible. There is also the power of public inspiration. Governments and private enterprises alike have a vested interest in promoting the idea of human expansion into the cosmos. It encourages STEM interest, political support, and national prestige. But inspiration is not the same as biological reality. The dreams of astronauts and billionaires cannot rewrite the laws of physics or human physiology. This raises a more uncomfortable possibility. Is Mars colonization itself a distraction? A distraction from Earth's pressing issues, climate change, global inequality, and environmental degradation, or even from the immense challenges of making space travel truly safe for humans. It's easier to envision a heroic future on another planet than confront the hard limitations we face here and now. And what about technology? Many proponents argue that robots will pave the way. Autonomous systems, AI, and robotic explorers could colonize and prepare Mars long before humans ever arrive. Perhaps they should, not because humans are incapable of reaching Mars, but because survival there is fundamentally incompatible with human biology. Maybe the dream is less about practicality and more about emotional fulfillment. The desire to push boundaries, to leave a mark on the universe, to imagine ourselves as interplanetary pioneers. The question remains, are we pursuing Mars as a scientific necessity or as a symbol of human ambition? It's a tension that cannot be resolved with enthusiasm alone. Each year brings new announcements, new missions, new prototypes. Yet the biological, psychological, and logistical realities remain unchanged. The timelines stretch, the rhetoric persists, but the scientific barriers do not bend to optimism. Mars may be technically reachable, but as we've seen, reachable does not mean survivable, and that leaves an unsettling question hanging in the air. Are we truly planning for life on Mars or simply dreaming about it? Visuals to reinforce this tension could include montages of triumphant rocket launches contrasted with data charts showing radiation, bone loss, or isolation risks, as well as timelines that stretch endlessly without ever reaching the point of true colonization. The juxtaposition underscores a gap between aspiration and reality. After everything we've explored, radiation, gravity, isolation, life support, and medical realities, it's clear that reaching Mars is not the same as living there. Engineering rockets and landing humans on the surface is one challenge. Keeping them alive for months, years, or decades is an entirely different, far more unforgiving problem. Survival does not equal colonization, and survival on Mars, as the data shows, is anything but guaranteed. So we must ask ourselves some uncomfortable questions. Are we mistaking ambition for inevitability? Is the narrative of Mars colonization driven by science or by emotion? By the human need to imagine a heroic future? Could Mars, in fact, be more of a symbol than a destination? A reflection of our aspirations, our drive to explore, our hope for transcendence, rather than a practical place to live and thrive. This isn't a call to abandon space exploration. It's a call to think critically, to scrutinize the difference between what is inspiring and what is scientifically achievable. Question the headlines. Follow the data. Consider the long-term consequences, not just the short-term spectacle. Mars may still have a role in humanity's story, but the role of a home, that story is far from written, and the evidence suggests we are not yet capable of safely living there. As you watch rockets lift off and hear about the next bold mission, remember, the dream of Mars should inspire caution as much as it inspires wonder, because in the end, it's not just about reaching another planet. It's about understanding whether humans can truly survive there. Visuals for this closing should be stark yet contemplative. Mars fading into darkness, the distant Earth rising above the horizon, and quiet ambient music to leave the audience reflective, questioning the allure, the optimism, and the reality of human colonization of another world.